When I was growing up, it always fascinated me learning how people in the past used to live and what their hopes for the future were. Though I try to be grateful for being born when I was, I couldn't help but feel envy for future generations. If you think about how rapid advances and innovations in technology have been over the past century, it's easy to imagine how good people are going to live in a couple of decades. Now I realize how great it would have been to be born earlier, because these days I don't have much hope for the future, either for myself or society at large. I know AI isn't the only major technological advancement, but it's what seems to be grabbing everyone's attention and contributing to a lot of the economic and social strife these past few years. Just in case this isn't obvious, but I'm not here to make an overview of the impact AI has on society. I'm only here to speak about how it's impacted me and my general demographic, which would be recent college graduates. So, most of what I'll say is within the context of higher education and the entry level job market, but I might also bring up how it's affected me as a lonely young adult. Also, to give my stance on it now, I wouldn't say I'm vehemently anti AI or anything. I still use it in my daily life, though I can't say it's had a profound impact on me. I just think that most of the development and investment in AI has been at the detriment of everyday people who can't have the benefits of AI beyond the occasional internet search or chatbot conversation. The way I see it, the genie is already out of the bottle, and setting fire to every single data center isn't going to undo everything. But I will start by giving my thoughts on the early days of generative AI, which most people point to the release of ChatGPT in late 2022 as the catalyst event. I was in my sophomore year of college at the time, and I hadn't really found out about it until the following semester in January 2023. Not like I had any friends to talk about it with back then, but it was impossible not to hear about other students using AI and treating it like the greatest invention ever. And I'm not saying this as a badge of honor or anything, but for the rest of my sophomore year, I didn't really use ChatGPT because I was the type of person in college who had no life outside of his schoolwork. So I did cringe stuff like follow the student handbook and generally despised the idea of cheating or taking shortcuts. It wasn't until my junior year when I started taking more advanced classes and the academic pressure started to ramp up. That's when I had the realization that no one really cares about the work you put into your classes. So long as you get a good grade, that's all people will ever see and ultimately use as a reference for your intelligence and work ethic. So, when faced with seemingly impossible assignments and projects, I can remember many late nights where I would just be going back and forth with ChatGPT for hours on end, all in pursuit of academic perfection. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't somebody who needed ChatGPT to write their essays or cheat on exams, but I can't really fault the people who were that dependent on AI because I've grown a lot more pessimistic about the value of college. But the rest of my time in college regarding AI isn't that noteworthy because I only ever used it exclusively for schoolwork. When I was on break, I never even bothered to open up a ChatGPT. And there is an argument to make that even with using AI, I was wasting my time focusing on getting good grades in college because it's not an important metric for your career. And while I do agree with that sentiment in hindsight, at the time I had plans of applying to graduate school, which is really the only reason you would need a good transcript. Otherwise, I would have just half assed all my classes like everybody else and used AI to cheat on everything. So, fast forwarding to my graduation, after my plans of pursuing my master's fell through, I decided to pivot towards the endless soul crushing ordeal that is applying to your first job. And I want to talk about how it feels beyond the statistics, even though those are already depressing by themselves. At least for the stuff I've been applying for, it seems like no company is willing to take anybody without experience. And I'm sure that most generative AI isn't taking people's jobs directly. A lot of companies are buying into the promises of AI's capability for productivity and savings, and just using that as an excuse to implement the latest generative chatbot or agent. But regardless of the reason, many of these companies just aren't willing to invest in entry level workers. It's too much of a financial and time commitment, especially if the work is monotonous and simple. Meanwhile, people who have several years of professional work experience can reap the benefits of the AI boom because they've been able to get past that initial title of entry level worker. In fact, that's likely the reason why so many entry level jobs have either disappeared or require several years of experience, because those jobs can be done much easier with AI and having middle management oversee the process instead of just hiring new employees. Okay, I might be talking out of my ass here, but the point I'm making is that it's not a great time to be a college graduate with no work experience, especially if you've relied on AI to get through school. And the frustrating part about it is that AI isn't even helping that much. There's this notable MIT study that talked about how 95% of companies investing in AI haven't seen any returns yet. I mean, even if it is a bigger financial commitment to train and compensate inexperienced workers, it's hard not to perceive this decision as companies overvaluing the potential of AI to actual people. I'm not saying that companies don't have an obligation to generate profit for their shareholders, but even then, it's clear that the main companies making money from this are the ones that develop and promote these AI tools. But speaking on an individual level, I just don't see many situations where using generative AI could help me that much. I'm a bit skeptical of using those AI powered job apps. Not that I have any moral issue with it, but rather it just seems too good to be true. Also, I find it ironic that these kinds of tools would have no purpose if it weren't for the widespread automation of the application process by HR. Because the main purpose of these tools isn't to help you automatically apply to jobs, those kinds of things already exist. It's there to help you detect keywords and modify your application to bypass whatever barriers the ATS has set up. This isn't an invalid approach to applying for jobs. I'm just making the point that AI has become so embedded within our lives that people are compelled to treat it as a solution when it's the same thing creating the problem. To give a similar example, I can also see that AI is eroding the value of higher education, both in principle and as a means for career development. And I don't think it's as simple as saying AI is making people more stupid. I think the problem is that people have become more cynical about the prospects of going to college, but begrudgingly attend because it's still a requirement for many jobs. I believe that most students were always going to take the path of least resistance, but before AI, cheating was a lot more tedious and inconvenient. At the same time, it's not in the best interest of colleges to forbid the use of AI, because at least in the US, these are businesses first and don't want to discourage prospective students from enrolling. And you could say that people aren't going to retain any information from their college years anyways, so they aren't missing out on anything by being dependent on AI. The thing is, if people are going to coast through their degrees using AI, college is losing some credibility as a filter for outputting educated and hardworking people. And if you really want to get cynical, from the perspective of HR, if you assume someone has been cheating through college using AI, then what's the point of hiring them? You might as well cut out the middleman and save the money by using AI directly. That's why it's not completely fair to blame everything on AI, as people do have to take some individual responsibility and try to adapt to the new landscapes for education and work. At the same time, there's no clear path for people to take because the current consensus on AI being valued over people is that you just have to learn and integrate AI more into your life. This last point is not as prevalent as things like school and the job market, but it is worth mentioning, and that is the impact AI has socially and on relationships. And as somebody who is chronically online with no in person social life, I'm probably taking this aspect of AI more seriously than I should, but I just think it's an interesting social phenomenon. What I'm referring to are examples of people having personal relationships with AI, or even talking to chatbots in a recreational context. I hope this isn't the case for the future, but I feel like there's always been an inverse correlation between the time people spend on the internet and their willingness to socialize in person. And the same way people who are constantly online often seek more niche, insulated communities to validate their identity, talking with AI is just another progression along that. A contributing factor to that is AI's sycophantic and agreeable nature, which is always trying to offer a solution even when it knows there isn't one available, which would complement the extreme online behavior of latching onto a specific ideology or identity, regardless of the practical value it has on one's life, because you would always have someone to reaffirm those beliefs, even if they aren't real. Though overall, I do think this issue is far less pressing than the previous ones, because a lot of the discourse around the social impact of AI has been contained to the internet. But to give some closing thoughts on the matter, at the present moment, I'm not feeling too hopeful about the impact of AI on my social and career related prospects. However, it's evident that the utility of AI is being overhyped to the point that I believe a crash is inevitable. I just hope it comes sooner than later. Until then, it's fair to assume that the most recent generation of educated yet inexperienced workers is going to be neglected over the short term profit and productivity gains that AI is promising to companies. I think the best thing people in my situation can do is just to conform to the current attitude that AI is great and that's going to change the world for the better. My reasoning for this is that it subscribes to the whole idea of AI being overvalued. So if you somehow attach yourself to that concept, you could somehow convince people you're worthy of a job or whatever else you're trying to achieve because you're presenting yourself with a lot more value than what you actually have. I know a lot of motivational people always preach the advice of not following the crowd and to take the unconventional path, but given my limited and cautious life experience, I'm not one to treat that approach with much validity. Yeah, I think that's all I have for the video. Thank you for listening if you made it all the way to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.